Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Rebecca McLaughlin-Easton, and this week we're drilling down into the energy sector, asking what does the future look like for oil and gas companies in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's an opportunity, but also a challenge.
A little bit later on, we'll turn our attention to solar energy, namely how the UAE and wider parts of the region are banking on it for a rainy day. But first, let's take the broad view of the energy sector to find out how both companies and governments are adapting to shifting market dynamics.
Worldwide lockdowns, shrinking demand, and a supply glut have sent shockwaves through the oil and gas sector and oil-reliant economies in the Middle East. Oil prices have made historic slides this year, and in April, US futures crashed below zero for the very first time. A report by the Institute of International Finance states that the Gulf region is facing its worst recession in history, with the economy of the six countries expected to shrink by nearly 4.5% this year. And it's the oil economy for the energy exporting region which will be worst hit. To counteract the impact of the global pandemic, the Central Bank of the UAE announced more than $13 billion of stimulus to support the banking and corporate sector. And ratings agency S&P believe that Abu Dhabi's fiscal buffers will be sufficient to cushion it from COVID-19's economic impact and oil slide. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's measures have included a tripling of VAT and an injection of over $13 billion into the banking system. John Sfakianakis is chief economist of Gulf Research Center in Saudi Arabia. He's also an associate fellow at Chatham House and a scholar at Cambridge University. I began by asking him what the next steps for the region's largest economy might be.
During the 2015-2016 crisis, Saudi Arabia had reserves of about $724 billion. This crisis finds Saudi Arabia with around $465 billion. So it's a different situation. Still, they have ample reserves, but if the oil price stays at 30, 35, and they keep on spending as they said they would be spending, meaning that the break-even price is much higher than what we have today in terms of oil, then something has to give. They'll have to use more of their reserves, or they'll have to increase taxes, as they have done recently.
The UAE is, of course, another heavily dependent oil revenue economy. Has it done enough with the measures that it's taken so far to bolster its fiscal and economic standing? Is it more resilient than people actually think?
No, it's a great question. Well, nobody is insulated, really, but there are certain countries, such as the UAE, which is better positioned to overcome the crisis. The UAE has taken measures at the outset of the crisis far and beyond most of the G20 countries and most of the OECD countries. If you look at the measures announced within the first few weeks of COVID, in terms of the measures to GDP, they were among the highest. I think they're thinking quite actively about how they can reconfigure themselves and recreate a very vibrant identity for the future of the UAE economy. And many of these parts have to do with industry and manufacturing in the UAE and the logistics space. This is a big concern for all countries around the world about the supply chain. And I think the UAE has been thinking quite hard, and many steps have been taken already there.
John, does this current situation present a crisis or an opportunity for oil and gas majors in the Middle East region?
It's an opportunity as they try to discover how much they're going to invest inside in their own industries, but also if they're going to acquire new companies outside. Obviously, they have to merge. Oil companies will merge, and that will depend on what happens to the demand cycles. This is the time to make their balance sheets healthier, to trim down on the fat, to do all these cost-cutting measures, and to rationalize.
Let me pick up on that. When you talk about mergers and acquisitions, who are we talking about? Which players in the market?
Majors will have to consolidate, and also the smaller companies. In the US, we are reading every day about all these shale companies going bust and some of them being acquired. At the same time, the price of oil is not helping many of them to break even. So shale will have to break even at 45 and $50 WTI, and that's not anytime soon coming. And they'll have to rationalize. The regional companies will have to think how they're going to grow organically inside, if they're going to acquire more companies outside. Are they going to acquire them in terms of opportunistic positioning or otherwise?
And so, with some global and regional oil and gas companies better positioned to weather the current market conditions than others, the coming years could reveal a sector with a very different energy.
Whilst the global pandemic has presented some oil and gas majors with immediate challenges, one renewable clean energy form is counting on sunny days ahead. Salima Saeed sheds some light on regional developments in the solar power sector.
Free, plentiful, and with the ability to power cities, the sun's rays can energize our lives with less damage to our planet than fossil fuels. Discovered by French scientist Edmond Becquerel in the 1830s, generating solar energy is now the fastest growing electricity source today. How does it work? Light rays reach the Earth in about 8 minutes. They collide with electron-charged solar panels and create a surge of energy called the photovoltaic effect. Leading the charge in the Middle East is the UAE, which has some of the highest solar exposure rates in the world. Currently, the country still gets most of its energy from fossil fuels, but by investing more than $163 billion in clean energy, it plans to increase its use of it by up to 50% by 2050. The country's solar endeavors started in 2013, and Abu Dhabi's massive Noor solar power plant launched last year. Bigger still, and set to become one of the world's largest solar plants, is a project by Abu Dhabi Power in the UAE's Al Dhafra region, which the company claims will generate the world's cheapest solar power for around 160,000 households by 2022. So what does a sun-powered world look like? Mubadala's Masdar city sought answers in 2008, building a 6 square kilometer future sustainable city in the UAE capital, with about a third of its power generated on site from solar panels. Overall, consumption is reduced by up to 60%, slashing carbon emissions and saving residents money. If that's the case, then why isn't everybody today using solar? Well, sun power has its limits.
It's a good economical choice. However, it's a partial supply of electricity. It's an intermittent source that can supply electricity only at the daytime. When you start implementing storage systems, it becomes more expensive. Batteries are still more expensive, and we have still to work a lot in order to bring down the system price to an affordable level.
In partnership, Masdar says, is how they're advancing the competitiveness of renewables, consulting in countries from Asia to North Africa, not least Morocco, where CSP technology, a form of harnessing the sun's electric energy through use of mirrors, is powering up.
We studied the options of having batteries, we studied the option of having molten salt, and eventually we found out that the optimum solution that will benefit our client is to have a photovoltaic plant plus with CSP and a molten salt storage that can provide the required electricity at the time, day and night, at the lowest cost possible. We are seeing all over the world different projects that really adapt renewable energy. The main driver is the public awareness about the importance of to adapt renewable energy.
The International Renewable Energy Agency estimates that by 2050, global demand for energy will nearly double. Renewable energy forms like solar use around 200 times less water than coal plants to create the same amount of electricity. And solar can also create water with reverse osmosis by desalinating water with 75% less energy compared to thermal methods. The Pan-Arab Clean Energy Initiative in 2013, targeting more clean energy dependence by 2030, has inspired other regional countries like Saudi Arabia in projects like Neom, a carbon-free megacity almost the size of Belgium, powered only by renewable sources. A sign of things to come, say some experts, as the region shifts away from fossil fuels.
So it's an unstoppable development. In the next couple of decades, solar and other renewables in the GCC will be the bulk of power generation.
With renewables being the future, the old guard oil and gas industry won't fade entirely into the past. One of its capabilities, some say, will be creating greener electricity and splitting hydrogen from water.
And hydrogen can replace natural gas. So what you can then do is you can basically build on the industrial and intellectual capacity that the region has in the oil and gas sector and transfer to green molecules and send those molecules to markets all over the world.
Perhaps not only pointing to a bright future for renewables, but also a ray of light for the traditional energy sector.
Well, that is where we have to leave it for this edition of Inspire Middle East. Thank you for watching, and do catch all of our shows online at euronews.com. Before I leave you with some energized posts that we liked on Instagram this week, let me just say, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.
Amanda from the US explored what she calls Mazda's breathtaking sustainable city upon visiting the UAE. And petroleum engineer Lim from Malaysia posted this pic of her oil rig training in Oman.